Avon Resources Limited is a gold exploration company with significant projects in British Columbia, Saskatchewan, and the Yukon. Trading on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol ABN, and the pink symbol ABN-AF. Surrounded by world-class gold deposits and mines, Avon's 23,000 hectares Forest Kerr Gold Project is located in the heart of the Golden Triangle in northwestern BC. For more information, visit us at avonresources.com.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is James Corbett, publisher of thecorbettreport.com and editorial writer for the International Forecaster. He's speaking to us from Japan, where he has worked and lived since 2004. Best of the holidays, James.
Happy holidays to you.
And an early Christmas present for you because your hometown Calgary Stampeders won the Grey Cup.
Yay! All right, let's celebrate. Oh, wait, I don't think that makes international headlines over here, but I'll take it. I'm very happy to hear that.
James, looking back at 2018, what do you feel were the top stories from Asia?
It's hard to single out because I feel detached from the news cycle this year. Some of the stories seem just so crazy, but unfortunately in this world where more and more people are getting their news from social media, I think that tends to amp up the hype and the hysteria and the outrage, and some of the important things get lost in that mix. I would say one of the overarching stories that obviously I think is a huge story of the year 2018 and that people will be talking about, I'm sure, in the coming year, is the development of the trade war primarily between China and the U.S., but really the U.S. and everyone in some cases, as we saw earlier this year with some of the theatrics happening at the G8 and some of the disputes that have happened even among supposed allies of the U.S., like Canada, like Japan, like others, being hit with various tariffs and these sort of things, really has thrown a monkey wrench into the works of the global order. And perhaps ultimately that might be to the good. Perhaps we did need a shakeup of that kind. But at any rate, it is certainly derailing a lot of expectations that have developed over the years in terms of business and trade functioning. And that is going to have disruptive effects on the global economy generally. It still remains to be seen to what extent this will last and what lasting effects it will have. But it certainly is one of the major stories, I think, to develop from this year.
Well, China has said over the past year, we will not be forced into any position. We will not negotiate with a knife to our throats. Do you think for somebody like President Trump, who loves to push things to the edge in his negotiations, it might have been a mistake?
I guess time will tell on that. A lot of the things that the diplomats say in response to these sort of things, I think, has to be taken with a huge grain of salt, because, of course, they're going to be in a position to say that no matter what. Clearly, as I think we've discussed over the course of this year, the U.S. has the upper hand in this relationship, at least in the short term. They clearly do have more leverage and are able to inflict more economic pain with tariffs and trade wars, and I think they're using that to their advantage right now. But as we've also talked about, I think the long-term shooting themselves in the foot is perhaps one way that this will develop, because all this does is send a signal not only to China, but essentially to every other nation on Earth that the U.S. is not going to play fair, and they're not going to play nice, and they're not going to be reliable trading partners. They will scuttle plans like the Iranian deal at the drop of a hat, and they will institute new sanctions, and they'll do trade wars and tariffs and whatever it takes. And if that's going to be the functioning, I think ultimately we'll start to see the acceleration of the development of that alternative trading arrangements and alternative plans like the TPP minus the U.S. These types of developments that we've seen in the last year or two are going to accelerate as the U.S. continues to send the signal that it's no longer going to be the central linchpin of this global order, at least not in the sense that we've understood it for the last 70 or so years.
With the U.S. wanting to be more self-focused, is that going to leave countries like China filling the vacuum internationally?
Increasingly so. And again, we see that with things like the development of regional trade deals in the wake of the vacuum that was left by the U.S. stepping out of the TPP. It clearly just means that China is going to have more leverage to worm its way into various relationships that the U.S. could have kept it out of. And, of course, this is all looking at it from some geostrategic perspective, so it all depends on what perspective you're coming from. But from the perspective that if the U.S. is going to be the leader of the world and the beacon on the hill and all of that, then clearly, again, as I say, long term, they are shooting themselves in the foot by basically abandoning that position and forcing everyone else into the power vacuum. And who is going to be one of the main players to step into that vacuum is going to be China, which, as we know, is poised to very shortly overtake the U.S. just in terms of the raw numbers of the size of its economy. It is a growing power, and I think the U.S. will have to reckon with that one way or another, and this is their way, at least in the short term, of trying to gain advantage from that, but in the long term, I think it's going to undermine their position.
Does China plan to build more aircraft carriers, which are widely known as a way of projecting your foreign affairs ability anywhere around the planet?
Yes, and that's exactly right. The only, real major aircraft carrier power on the planet of any size is the U.S. Navy, but that is changing. And China is certainly getting into that game, and they are greatly expanding their Navy, not just aircraft carriers. There are headlines making the rounds right now. China's naval future, 6 aircraft carriers, ? There's even a global plan. China's Navy could have 10 aircraft carriers and more. So there is a lot of speculation about this point right now, but I think that's just one sign. Obviously, aircraft carriers are the most visible and most sort of largest sign, but there are a lot of signs that China has been pumping up and expanding its Navy, naval power as part of its projection of its 9-dash line in the South China Sea. Its claim to a large portion of the sea trading routes that are very important to China, certainly, but also important to the Philippines and Vietnam and many of its the other countries in the region. So this is clearly China is amping things up and trying to project its power, and I think aircraft carriers are the most visible sign of that.
We'll have more with James Corbett right after this.
I'm Douglas Mason, CEO of Naturally Splendid, symbol NSP on the TSX Venture Exchange. Naturally Splendid is a biotechnology and consumer products company focused on the global cannabis and health markets. Naturally Splendid is expanding distribution in this rapidly growing market with products currently in Canada, the USA, South Korea, Germany, and Australia. To view our comprehensive company presentation and for more information, please visit our website at naturallysplendid.com.
MGX Minerals is revolutionizing the new energy economy with patented lithium extraction technology, replacing traditional solar evaporation using low-cost, low-energy nanofiltration. The first system of this paradigm shift technology is currently being commissioned. MGX Minerals trades on the CSE, symbol XMG, the OTCQB, symbol MGXMF, and Frankfurt, symbol 1MG. For more information, visit our website, mgxminerals.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with James Corbett. James, what about some of the scandals that rocked China or Japan over the past year? We had the Nissan CEO being hauled off in chains, Kobe Steel, the airbag scandal. What sticks out in your mind as being one of the worst, and can you give us some details on those three things?
Right. Well, I think not one of those, I think, is the dramatic, unbelievable scandal that stopped the world. But I think the combination of these things do add up to a diminution of any idea that Japan Inc. is a strong and vibrant part of the world economy, or that made in Japan is some sign of quality of technical expertise or anything. I think the shine has long since fallen off of that idea, that label. So this is just more nails in the coffin of the idea that Japan is the technological superpower and a high-tech futuristic society. No, it has the same types of corporate governance scandals and even corporate manufacturing scandals like we saw in Kobe Steel. As people might know, that Kobe Steel was basically fraudulently fudging the numbers on various stress tests and things that they did to some of their products, which ended up in cars and airplanes and bullet trains and other extremely sensitive mechanical equipment, and that of course caused a huge scandal at the time. But as I've seen people in Japan commenting, well, it's kind of unfortunate for Kobe Steel because everybody does that. And of course, this is the type of thing that surfaces every couple of years in Japan. There's some sort of scandal like that. A few years ago, it was earthquake guidelines for real estate construction and parking lot construction and things like this. There are certain, obviously, guidelines that are meant to be followed, engineering guidelines for structural detailers and others, because this is a highly earthquake-prone nation. And a big scandal emerged a few years ago that there was a company that was fudging numbers and saying they were doing things that they weren't. And so this emerges every few years, and it seems to be a shock every time it does. But when you add it up, it just means that the idea that Japan is an incredibly safety-conscious and incredibly diligent nation is perhaps more PR than reality. And then with the Nissan scandal, I mean, that's an interesting one from a number of perspectives, and it just keeps getting worse and worse as we're talking. The disgraced Nissan chairman is actually going to be detained even further in the Japanese justice system. He could be detained for months more, given Japanese legal procedures. And unfortunately for him, if he does get charged, if there are charges dropped, there is something on the order of I think it's 97%, maybe 99%, I can't remember off the top of my head, conviction rate in the Japanese justice system. So it is unlikely that he's going to escape it if charges are filed and in what way they come. And then that just gets worse and worse for Nissan, which for a long time has been criticized as not having a very diverse, a truly independent board. So Nissan is now coming out and saying that they're going to expand their board and they're going to have more external board members. They're going to set up a committee to oversee compensation. But the worst news is still to drop, as unfortunately the fact that the board may be legally, or at least in terms of civil lawsuits, responsible for this scandal resolving around Carlos Ghosn and whatever deal he was trying to cut to defer payments in order to avoid taxes and other responsibilities. Whatever is happening here, it seems the board may be held legally responsible for that, or at least face civil lawsuits for their inaction in the face of these shenanigans. So it just keeps getting worse and worse for Nissan, which again just takes more of the gloss off of some of these big letter Japanese companies.
We'll have more with James Corbett right after this.
Grand Portage Resources recently completed the 2018 drill program on its 100% controlled Herbert Gold Discovery property located in the prolific Juneau Belt in southeast Alaska. Drill results are expected through late 2018. Past drill results included numerous multi-ounce gold assays on multiple veins. Grand Portage trading symbols are GPG on the TSX Venture, GPTRF on the OTCQB, and GPB on Frankfurt. For more information, please visit our website, grandportage.com.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with James Corbett. James, what about the Japanese government's fiscal policy over the past year? Are they interested at all in hiking interest rates like Canada and the U.S.?
Well, I think they would be interested in doing it if they could get away with it. But unfortunately, no. As we've seen, the Bank of Japan has thoroughly painted itself into a corner, as they even admitted earlier this year, as we talked about, I think back in March or April. You had some of the Japanese, the Bank of Japan board members coming out and saying, we have painted ourselves into a corner and there's no way out of this. We want to remove the training wheels from the economy, as it were, but we can't stop with our stimulus because there's no way that the economy will support it. So we're in this holding pattern for the moment, and as long as they can get away with it, I think they will continue to get away with it. But unfortunately, the piper will be paid at some point, and it's only a question of how. And again, without some spectacular growth in the Japanese economy, some incredible thing coming along to fill up that space that's currently being used by the Bank of Japan to basically prop up the markets, it's only a question of how quickly and how harshly things deflate here. Again, in terms of actually trying to increase rates, I just don't think they're going to be able to get away with it the way things are in the economy right now. And that's not even taking into account the rise in consumption tax that's going to happen next year, that if the last rise in consumption tax is anything to go by, is going to hit the spending in terms of the economy pretty hard.
Is there another wave of buying washers and dryers and things like that would be hit with the sales tax?
It's very likely that will eventuate. As people might know, a couple of years ago, the consumption tax was raised here. And right before that, of course, we saw a huge rise in consumer spending on various products because people were trying to get it in before the tax hit. They're trying to head that off this time. They're going to make some exceptions. They're going to do some government stimulus programs to help support spending in the auto sector and other places. Remains to be seen how successful that will be. We'll have to wait till I believe it's October when this is supposedly going to go into effect. So if there's a big spike in the summer months, we'll know what people are doing.
Does the Bank of Japan still expect in the new year to keep buying up ETFs, becoming the biggest shareholder in Japan's 50 biggest companies?
Well, there's no plans that I know of for them to really exit this program. So, again, it's part of the buying itself into a corner. How do you exit from a program like that without sending the stock market and ultimately the bond market into a tumble? They are propping it up. And as you say, the Bank of Japan is technically the largest shareholder in a number of corporations on the Nikkei stock exchange, not directly, but because they have been buying ETFs, exchange-traded funds. And that puts them in a position where they are spending billions of dollars on this and no end in sight. In fact, just on Thursday, December 12th, they spent 71.5 billion yen in ETFs. I mean, that's just a one day of purchases. So again, the numbers here are phenomenal, and there's no real exit plan in sight here, at least not one they're letting the public know about.
How will it affect Japan if its stock market is hooked to the Canadian and U.S. markets and they take a dive in the new year?
Well, that's the interesting part about this, because as people I'm sure are aware at this point, the global markets are more and more interconnected, and the Japanese market has always had a direct relation to what's happening with the U.S., specifically the U.S. dollar. And we see, obviously, the old idea of the yen being the carry trade of people trying to buy in yen, and then liquidating that when the dollar starts rising. That obviously plays into this. So the dollar and the stock markets are interrelated, and any sort of massive bump in the road for, say, the U.S. economy is going to be affecting Japan quite heavily, because obviously Japan trades heavily with the U.S. So all of this, the trade war and all of this, feeds into each other, and that's all intimately connected now, not just the U.S. and Canada and China and Japan and some of these big players, but the emerging markets too are intimately connected into the system. So I think the risk of systemic problems grows as the economy becomes more and more globally interrelated. And that's why I think global slowdown of the economy is even more of a concern now than it was in times past, when at least you had pockets of different regions that traded more with each other. Now you have truly global trade going on, so disruptions to that really does have an effect on people all around the globe.
James, going into the new year, what's your big wish for everybody?
Global peace and prosperity. Barring that, I think the thing that one of the things that really concerns me at this point is what we talked about before, with the social media dominance of the hype and outrage, the sort of scandalous nature of the news popping in the news feeds and making everybody rage click on this story or that story, is ultimately detrimental to society as a whole. And the more that people get at each other's throats, I think that's going to manifest politically, economically, societally, every other way. And the real question is, how do we combat that? And how do we find a more measured form of discourse and a more measured way of receiving and processing information than what we are being treated to with the blaring headlines of the news of the day? And how can we concentrate on the more important issues about how we really build for tomorrow when we're always outraged about what's happening today? It's a very big question, and that's the kind of thing I don't have any pat solution to, but I think it's something that we have to start taking probably more seriously than we have up to this point.
James, thank you so much for speaking with us.
Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
My guest has been James Corbett, publisher of thecorbettreport.com. He was speaking to us from Japan. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio. Find us on Twitter at HowStreet. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. If you have any questions for James or any of our other guests, you can send them to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Best of the holidays.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.